So welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Andrea Drews. I'm a faculty member at Rider University in the Graduate Education, Leadership, and Counseling Department. So I do a lot of teacher education work with both pre-service and in-service teachers, specifically, well, a little bit of everything, but mostly science education. I come to Rider after being a middle school science teacher for a while and teacher educator at the Bronx Zoo for a bit, and now am faculty here at Rider University, which is in Lawrenceville, which is the central part of the state. So I have a background in climate change teacher professional development, but I'm so very excited in just a few minutes to welcome Dr. Missy Holzer. But before I hand the reins over to Missy, I just want to give everybody a tiny bit of background info about our New Jersey Student Climate Challenge project. If you are unfamiliar, if this is your first PD that you're tuning in with us, here's just a tiny bit of background info, and then I will hand it over to Missy. So the challenge is geared for students in public schools in grades 6 through 12. Students will be participating in the challenge on teams of roughly 2 to 12 students, so definitely okay to have multiple teams per classroom. But we want to keep those team sizes manageable so that all of the students can kind of have a voice in their participation on these teams and on these action projects. Because that's the big idea that with these action projects is that students are thinking about how they can work together to design and actually implement a school project, community project that addresses either a human cause of climate change or some of the negative impacts on climate change on our environment. And then working together to create a digital story video about their projects. We have tons of helpful resources and information, student sessions, other PD sessions that provide lots of additional information and resources and tools that you can use in your classroom to support students as they figure out what would be a great action project in their beliefs, and then how you can best support them. And one of those is the PD today. The timeline, just to give again a little nugget of information here, is that over the month of February, we have numerous student sessions and professional development sessions to help support everyone in these efforts. The challenge submissions, so those videos will be due on April 1st. During the month of May, we'll be able to announce some of our finalists, and then we're looking forward to having an award ceremony, very hopefully in person at the Drumthwacket Mansion in June. And you can see at the bottom of the screen there's some pretty nice financial grants that can be won by the student teams to help support new sustainability or environmental and climate action projects in the future. And without further ado, I'll have lots of other resources that I'll be dropping into the chat, but I would love to hand things over to a climate education guru for our state. I'm so proud to have her here tonight, and I will hand it off to Dr. Missy Holzer.
Okay, thanks so much, Andrea. And this project, this competition just seems like so much fun. Having viewed a number of them from last year, I just know that the students had a great time creating the projects. And what was so cool about it is they were thinking critically that we have these challenges in our climate with our climate system right now, and we need to come up with some way to figure out how to eradicate these problems. So I hope that your schools will participate and give your students an opportunity to jump in and be part of that solution. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is some of the background and what actually makes this competition so compelling. So let me do share screen and let's move ahead. So what I'm going to be doing is switching off the camera on this computer and switching over to my desktop. And so you'll see a talking head for this presentation, but I am here and I'll connect with you with video in the end. Thank you. Okie doke. All right. So the goal of today is to think about our curricula and then how to integrate the climate change into our curricula. You know, every time the state does a change in the standards, we all go scrambling when we pull our hair out and we're wondering, how are we going to be able to implement changes in the curricula, whether it be for climate change or anything that's been added, because it just seems like it's another layer. I should just give you a little brief little background on myself. So I was in the classroom in high school's earth and space science and environmental science and physical geography teacher at Chatham High School. And my career was 34 years, but right now I wear my day hat as a science standards specialist with a company called Great Minds with outrageous curriculum, science curriculum called PhD Science. And then I also wear a couple of other hats. And those hats I'll be wearing today as I share some information with you. First, I'm a clean ambassador, and you'll learn all about that momentarily. And then I'm also an education outreach specialist with the Office of the New Jersey State Climatologist. So anyway, wearing that teacher hat that I had for 34 years, I know where you're coming from. When the state says do this, it's like, where are we going to start? I thought I was doing something so well, and I was doing it for so long, and it worked in my classroom. Now I've got to do other things. Well, hopefully by the end of the time that we're spending together today, you'll find that all of this, all these great activities, all this science is right there at your fingertips. So let's get started. So we have already gone through this. Thank you, Andrea, for starting us out with who you are and putting yourself in the chat box so we get to know who you are. So welcome, everybody. Please do use the chat box if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them along the way. And Andrea mentioned that she will be dropping some links for us into the chat box as we move forward. So you'll have links to all that. And I'm also happy to share my slide deck with you. So to kind of get us thinking about connections, global connections, I thought this would be a fun thing to look at. And what you're seeing is the recent Tonga eruption and volcanic eruption in the South Pacific. And it's just a satellite view. And it's just so impressive that it just was so effusive. And actually, I just read recently that the particles from this made its way all the way up into the mesosphere. So above the troposphere, above the stratosphere and up into the mesosphere. Now, it was the particles were small enough that it's not going to have an impact on our climate, as did some eruptions in the past, but the particles did make their way up that high. So you can imagine that an eruption that explosive, though, would have impacts possibly around the world. We know that one of the things that the news said to watch out for were tsunamis. And the tsunamis, you know, you have something trigger in one part of the world and it can fester itself across the oceans and bodies of water. Well, we don't always think about what you're looking at here on the right side of the screen. So if you look at the barometric pressure, and this is local data, gang. This is New Brunswick data. And you see that little blip all the way up at the top of the screen that has a circle? That barometric pressure, that little upscale in the increase in barometric pressure was actually caused by the Tonga eruption. We felt it in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And so we can actually time from the time the eruption took place until that we saw that little peak in New Brunswick at the barometric pressure. And so what goes around keeps going around. Next day, we actually saw another blip in the barometric pressure, another upshoot in the barometric pressure. So it wasn't just a one shot, the increase of the waves and the pressure around the world, but it's actually a second time that we felt it here in New Jersey. So bottom line is that we're all connected. And we'll learn more about that as we move through and talk a little bit about the climate system and how that's connected, and then where you can find those resources for students to realize how connected we actually are. So the goal for today, we've got a 3-part goal. One is we're going to talk a little bit about climate change education in New Jersey. And my guess is that you've got a pretty good foundation in that. So we won't spend a lot of time on that, but want to point out a few nuances as well, some resources to get you to be thinking about those shifts in the standards. Assessing New Jersey climate data. I'm going to point you to some places where you should be able to access climate data so students can come to their own conclusions about New Jersey's climate change issues. And then finally, I'm going to take you to a collection called the CLEAN Collection, Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness. And I think you're going to find that this, along with the state resources, are going to be a one-place stop. So here we go. Okay, so we know that New Jersey's climate is changing, and what you're seeing there on the right-hand side of the screen is that these are the impacts. We're seeing rising temperatures, increased precipitation, sea level rise, ocean acidification, air quality shifts, water resources supply and quality issues, agricultural issues, forest changes, wetlands changes, changes in the ability for the terrestrial carbon sequestration, changes in our terrestrial systems, our freshwater systems, and marine systems. You know, I think it's worth saying all of those because it reinforces the fact that it's not just a list, but instead, these are some true impacts, some real things that are happening to us here in New Jersey. And these are things that we need to be prepared for. Well, let's take that back. We need to be ready for as they're happening and be able to address them. And that's where this competition and your students' ideas will help us out a little bit. So where we can go to learn a little bit more about the nuances of these shifts in the climate, these climate changes. There was a report, the 2020 New Jersey Scientific Report on Climate Change, and the link is there on the bottom. And it's a very user-friendly document, and it's got a clickable list over on the left-hand side where you can actually get into those particular things. So if you're teaching about a particular, you're someplace in your, I'm going to suggest science curricula, thinking about the science educators online with us today. If you're thinking about your science curricula, I bet you're going to find that one of those, if not multiple of those that you see in that list, will be things that you can integrate into your classroom. You can be possibly talking about temperature changes within a chemistry class, the impacts of temperature change in a life science class in ecology, and biomes, and the list goes on and on. Ocean acidification is another one that it can be integrated in both a biology class and a chemistry class. And of course, all of these can live in an environmental science class, in an earth systems class as well. So I encourage you to go to this. It's user-friendly, and you could possibly even jigsaw it with your students and use it as a teaching tool within your classroom. So one of the things that we got to think about here in New Jersey is that it's an equity issue. Climate change is an equity issue. And that, you know, we have places that are feeling the climate change issues more so than others. There's a resource I'll direct you to later on that will actually show you little enclaves within communities that will have more of an impact on climate change, feeling the impacts of climate change than other parts within a community. So it's actually a demographic mapping tool using census data to identify these areas that are more challenged, areas that are going to be feeling the impacts. And this tool will actually show you the types of impacts that can actually occur there. So for instance, if we're looking at a city location, an urban center, the lack of trees is an issue and therefore can increase the impacts of climate change. The role of trees could play in our climate system, local climate systems, is just, it's just amazing. And that lack of trees can be an issue. And the list goes on, but I'll point you to that resource as we move on in a little bit. So our goal here for New Jersey is to prepare students to live healthy, productive lives equipped with the knowledge and skills to make their local and global communities a better place to live. Help them be stewards of our local environments, just like you and I are stewards of our local environments. So what's new in our learning standards? Well, climate change was integrated into all of the subject areas minus mathematics and ELA. And the reason why those were not is because those standards were recently revised. And so when they go for their next revisions, they'll likely see that math and ELA will also include climate change. But we can't leave them out because students need to communicate and students need to think analytically. And so that's where the math standards and the ELA standards are going to pop in and support climate change education. So one of the arguments for creating this graphic the way you see is that it's showing that climate change is central and that we should be thinking about those curricular connections, that when where can we how can we teach climate change through the lens of this, but not only lens of one thing, but as instead I think the deficiency of this image is that the little circles on the outside are just not overlapping enough. They're touching, but they're not overlapping, because they should be overlapping. So let's take a quick look at the revisions to New Jersey science standards. First off, you can find all of our revised standards and the climate change education by grade band on the new New Jersey standards website. And the link is at the bottom of this page, very easy to get to, and just kind of navigate yourself over to climate change education. And you're going to see that what Mr. Hines has done is that Mike Hines has done is he's kind of taken all of these out and made it user-friendly for the districts and well, schools and teachers to integrate these new standards into their classroom. So I encourage you to go to the website. They've done a terrific job with this. And so you can see the breadcrumb trail, by the way, through here. So if you just kind of click through, it'll land on this page here. Okay, but getting into the nuts and bolts, this is kind of a messy slide. I think I break the rule of the number of words that you can have on a slide. But just to point out that for the most part, our climate change has been integrated into the Earth and Space Science standards, and it's also been integrated into what I think is really cool, is the engineering and technology standards as well. So you have a little bit of, you have K2 and 3.5 integration here. I'm not going to read them to you, just a little bit about change. Middle school, we have just one change, that we've taken out global temperatures and put climate change in there instead. And then at the high school level, we've added climate change and stress to climate change in 3 different elements. All of the, or standards rather, all of the standards that you see here are in the human impact side of Earth and Space Science. So I encourage you to look at them and think about how you can integrate those into your science curricula. Okay, but then I get back here. What we should be thinking of, and that what makes this project, this competition so wonderful, is that we should be thinking of this as a solutions instead of not teaching I got to teach this content, but we should be thinking about how are we going to come up with solutions, and just as understanding that underlying knowledge through the lens of all these different subject areas is going to really get us to these really great solutions, because the solutions, problem solving, is tantamount to that, and it's going to require an integrated approach. And so it's going to, in order for us to get to solutions for adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, what we've got to do is look at climate change as being a grand challenge of today, and think about how we can get all of these subjects together to be thinking about those solutions. So we can call it interdisciplinary, we can call it transdisciplinary. We can also problematize this through the P's. And so that's place-based education, project-based education, or problem-based education. All of those models of classroom instruction are perfect for us to get to what we need here today, is those solutions for adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. New Jersey is on the ground floor of climate change here. And you'll find when you read that report that we are warming faster than any state in the union. The data actually supports that. So where do I get started thinking about integrating and coming up with solutions and teaching through an interdisciplinary lens about climate change? Well, Mike has done a wonderful job of coming up with some sample interdisciplinary connections. And you're going to see that it's not all science-based, which is so cool, is that he's very nicely pulled in those different subject areas to help you think about ways of integrating, across topics when teaching about climate change and climate science. So I encourage you again to visit the standards page. Lots of great resources in there. Okay, so resources, where do we going to do about resources? So there's one of the things we need to be thinking about is, first off, is that we want vetted resources. And so what the first stop I'm going to suggest is that we go to our federal agencies. And NOAA has the website, climate.gov has the website for climate change. I will be sharing with you, the bottom left is clean. I'll be sharing with you the second half of our time today, some connections on how to use the CleanNet to get some great resources. But there's also Series, which is out of University of Colorado. And they have some great resources. All of these have been vetted and the science is terrific. And then finally, Climb Time is another place that we can go to for more resources. But actually, I'm going to go back to this page. What I want to point out too as well is looking at this breadcrumb trail here in the middle, New Jersey Climate Change Education Resources. When you're on that page, you're going to see that Mike has culled a great list of resources for you to use. And one of the things that he's made sure happened before he allowed them to get onto the page is made sure that they passed accessibility rules. So anything that you find from his list of resources, you're going to find that they've passed all accessibility rules. Okay, and here we go. Real quick in the chat box, do we have any questions before we move on?
Feel free if anybody does have chats. I will be keeping an eye. I've been blowing up the chat with some tons of the links that you're sharing as you move through just to get them clickable. But yeah, feel free, folks, as you're watching to add those questions in for Missy. But I think we're okay right now, Missy.
That's terrific. Okay. To keep the questions coming, though, happy to help out and happy to answer any questions that you have. So let's take a look at accessing New Jersey climate data. One of the things, just kind of plant the seed, one of the things that we want to ensure is that when we say climate change, that we've got the evidence to back it up. And I'm going to tell you, there's plenty of evidence out there, but lots of times the evidence is more at a, even beyond regional scale. Usually we see evidence that is either at the national scale or we see it at the global scale. Rarely do we see data that supports the argument that our climate's changing at such a local scale than at the state level. I mean, what I'm going to do right now is point you to a few places where you can get that state data as well as maybe data for even your community. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so first off, one of the things to think about when we're looking at any data when we're looking at climate change, or actually any data for any kind of science that we're borrowing from someplace else, whether we're looking at ecological data, whether we're looking at climate data, weather data, et cetera, is that we've got to learn how to ask the right questions. So first off, we want to ask the question, how is it collected? So you should know a little bit about the weather stations that are used to collect that data. And then you also want to know alongside that what's called the metadata. And so metadata is data about data. And that's kind of crazy thing to say, but it's data about the data. And so, for instance, if we have a weather station located in New Brunswick, the metadata would tell us how long that station has been there, if any of the instruments have been changed out, has the reporting time changed, all of these things. It'll give the lat and long of the station. It'll give everything that you need to know about the station in order for you to look at that data as being a reliable source. So always ask the question, how is it collected and is that metadata available? Many times you'll find that with satellite data per se, and I know that's more at a global scale, regional and global scale, but satellite data will tell you about the satellite. But here, when looking at state level data, we're looking more about the station level data. Next, if you're looking at the displays, how were the displays created? Was it interpolation or was it extrapolation? So there's a little bit of a math skill for your students to be thinking about, is how we are interpreting the data when we don't have continuous data. So one of the other things you might see is this thing called POR. When you're looking at data, especially large data sets, it might say that it might have that acronym in there, POR. It's referring to the period of record, and so the question related to that is, did the data collection protocols change during that period of record? And if so, does it impact the data and how it's interpreted or analyzed? I did a graduate research project on the diurnal temperature changes of New Jersey and trying to identify where we have heat islands, urban heat islands across our state. And I was looking at hourly data for over across a course of 5 years from 5 different stations. And it was a lot of data. So if you can imagine that 24 times 365 times 5, that's an awful lot of data that I culled through. But one of the things I needed to know in order to identify those 5 stations so I could actually correlate my data was that POR. I needed to know that the POR for each of those 5 stations actually matched up. So kind of pay attention to that, because sometimes with that period of record, there might be shifts in it. And especially if you want to compare 2 different places, so take a peek at that before you move forward with using the data. And then the big question too is, how much data is enough? We look at middle school science practices. We want students to be looking at the middle school level, starting there at what are called large data sets. It's actually in one of the science and engineering practices. And so when we're looking at the climate system, what we want is 30-year data. And so usually the running means are across 30 years. And so let's make sure that when you're looking at that period of record, that you're going across a period of at least 30 years. And then finally, one of the things we want to do is think about our learners and where our learners are and being able to understand and work with data sets. And so what we might want to do is just grab some small pieces of data rather than sending students out to these sites to grab the data. Instead, what we want to do is create these, what I'm going to call data bites. And so you might grab just a small set of data for students to work with their, maybe with a partner, rather than giving them access to the website. Or you might let them have the website, but just kind of keep in mind that students might not be ready for those large data sets yet. They'll need a little bit of that scaffolding. So one way to scaffold them is this wonderful little activity from BSCS called Identify and Interpret strategy. And it's this 3-part step. And so first thing we do is show students some kind of graphic, and it doesn't have to be a line graph as we're seeing here. Instead, it could be a bar chart. It could be any kind of image or figure. And we actually ask them just to identify 3 things. Keep it simple. Identify 3 things. Invariably with my students, and they were high school students, they always want to go for the biggest peak, the biggest valley, and then they'll forget all those little nuances in between. And that's fine. It's because they're getting started and they're starting to get into that data set. So first step is that we want to get them to look at 3 data points. Now, the second thing is they have to come up with a what does it mean statement for each one of them. So they're going to look at, so for instance, the one on the top there, I see that the peak is in July. It means that it's the hottest average temperature for that particular city was in July. And that's simple. It's basically, they're doing an interpret, but they're not coming up with any kind of inferences embedded in that. And then finally, the last thing that they do, and as they embed themselves into this graph, is they come up with a caption. So they take those 3 interpret statements and they turn them into a caption for the figure. And this is just a simple little tool that you can do with your students, a little scaffold that you can do with your students to help them out when they're looking at larger data sets until they get the hang of it. We definitely want to support them in their journey to climate data and climate science. So where can you find data? So one of the great places to go is to the office of the New Jersey State Climatologist. And in the upper, and when you get to the homepage in the upper left corner, you're going to see that there's a New Jersey focused set of links there. And when you click on each one of them, they'll open up and you'll see that there's a number of sites that you can go to in there. And so the climatologies is basically going to bring you up to our climate zones. And so it's just going to give you the New Jersey overall climate. However, when you go to climate information, it's basically the climate information is where you're going to live for this, is that you're going to see a whole bunch of links in there, and most of them are user friendly, and you should be able to grab the data that you need for 30-year records across the state. And you can actually zero in by county, you can actually zero in by weather station from across the state. And so that's one place that you can go. And another place, unfortunately, I apologize, my arrows in a way. Another place you can go is to the NOAA's Climate at a Glance. And unfortunately, as I just broke my train there, is that the site has been having a few hiccups lately, but it should be up and running as the team is working on fixing it and getting it running well. Gang, this is awesome site. The Climate at a Glance is where you can
Hey,
zoom in,
just a
you can
quick
get
thing.
not only,
I was on the website,
yeah,
the schools.
which one? Oops, was that
Oh,
Renee?
I think we're okay. I think we're okay.
Okay, all righty.
Sorry about that.
Anyway, so Climate at a Glance is, as I said, is a terrific page, and you can zoom into not only just New Jersey, but you can get down to your county, and you have all the climate data that you needed. And in the window that you see down here where the map is, you can actually bring up graphs, and so students can actually analyze graphs here. And it's also the type of graph, really cool graph, where you can kind of use a rubber, what I'm going to call a rubber band, where you can stretch and you can zoom in. You have 30 years of data, but then you can have students zoom into small sections of it. So it's a super great site. And as I said, unfortunately right now, a couple little bit of hiccups with it, but it should be up and running, I suggest, in the near future. A couple of other great places. So if you want to get an understanding is if our region is experiencing climate change, you can actually go to the Northeast Region Climate Center, and that's out of Cornell. And they actually have some data that's more regional based. And you can kind of surf around on that site and find some climate data. And then finally, you can go to the NOAA climate.gov maps and data site, and tons and tons of data there. And that, my friends, is where I mentioned that you can navigate to some maps that will actually get you to the demographic data, and you can zero in and find out what communities, communities within bigger cities or towns or sections of towns are going to experience climate change more so than others. And it's for a variety of reasons. And there's so many different variables that they pulled in to suggest that one part of a town might feel it more so than another part of the town. And so for our vulnerable population, that's a great way to find out who they are and where they are in order to get them the help that they need. Okay, so great website. Okay, and then a couple of other places to go to. I've already mentioned this one up here is the 2020 report, a scientific report, which is kind of keeps it simple and right on us. But you also have this other great report too. It's the 4th climate assessment. And here, if you go to just kind of navigate a little bit, got a little bit of a breadcrumb trail for you here, report chapters, then the regions, and then chapter 18 is for the Northeast. You can actually download that as a PDF. And this is the link to get you there. And I know Andrea is doing a fabulous job of kind of keeping us all these in here. Oh, okay, I see a question. Oh, let me get this in real quick. So what I just did over the past few slides is I showed you rabbit holes that we could easily go down. If you're interested in a tutorial, if you're interested in a workshop for you and your colleagues, I'm happy to walk you through those websites and how to access the data. You just need to, I'll have my email up at the end. Please just contact me and I'm happy to take you down that rabbit hole because I think you'll find that it's worthwhile because there's a lot of great data on there. But it's easy to get lost and not find your way back out. So please contact me if you're so inclined. Okay, and so I do see a question here, and I do see one I'm gonna from Saul. But for others that are online, feel free if you have if you're using climate change and doing something already in your classroom, share it out. Tell us what you're doing, and then if you have a question, use a chat box. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. So from Saul, how might local higher ed support teachers and districts in a meaningful way so as to take some of the load off the teacher's capacity to upskill in a current climate? I'm thinking about this a lot and want to think about this in a coordinated way. It's an awesome question. So it depends. I'm going to suggest it's going to depend upon higher ed, what higher ed has to offer. And so, for instance, in the case of let's see, in the case of the Office of the New Jersey State Climatologist, they have a ton of data that we can offer to districts and for teachers and share it on out. If in the case of I'm not sure which university you're at, which higher ed institution, maybe there's some expertise that some of the professors in that college actually possess. And there's got to be some way, either sharing out to the district to get that expertise out to the district. So for instance, you might, if you're in your university, if you have, I'm going to say that in the English language arts department, that you have writers and you have professors that specialized in environmental writing. And they might reach out to a local district, and say that we have this so-and-so professor that can offer a reading list, and that would be helpful, so helpful for an English teacher to have that reading list of resources at their fingertips. But I'm going to suggest that it might be to first step one, inventory what you have that might contribute. And then step two would be to reach out at the district level. Because otherwise, I think you're going to be kind of looking for that needle in a haystack to make those connections. And so that coordinated effort, I would think, would be more at a district level. And then I believe we have county superintendents as well, and that might be a level to go for as well. But I'm going to suggest that if you want to keep it kind of in the community wide, you might think about the district levels, or the districts that were within the region of your higher ed location. I know that was kind of a broad generalization as to what you can do. I'm hoping that gives you possibly a little bit of insight into what can be done. But I appreciate the offer, though, and I'm sure it would be greatly appreciated by the teachers that take advantage of it. Okay. All right. So let's jump in and learn a little bit about the CleanNet and Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network. And so, that picture that I had in the front end was the model for us that we're all connected. And so this one too is, again, model that we're all connected. That we have all of these interactions in the climate system that are taking place, and it looks like, in this cute little tiny picture, we're looking at all of these things at such a small level, but these things are spread out, and they do interact across the spectrum. And so how do we teach about this? How do we teach effectively about this? Because we have scientists that are working in different domains. So we have scientists that are working from the atmospheric side of the climate system and interactions. We have scientists that are working at the hydrosphere side. We have scientists working at the cryosphere side, and again at those interactions as well. And the list goes on and on. So we know that scientists even parse out. They look at the subsystems within this great complex system. And so how can we get our students to be thinking about that? And that's where I was thinking along the lines of your subject area. I bet there's ways that you can focus in on pieces of this. And that's where, when we think about solutions that are integrated, we can think about this whole thing, but looking at maybe pieces of it that we can look at it through an integrated lens. And so, for instance, the cities, urban centers might contribute to the transportation issues and climate change. It might contribute to just the buildings and the urban heat from the buildings, the land use and the water resources. All of those things right in an urban center could contribute to climate change and warrants an eye from all subject areas. Okay, so, there were some frameworks that were put together early on, a long time ago. There was the climate literacy framework that did a nice job of saying that these are the key principles that every person should know from K to gray about our climate system. And it was a wonderful document. It had the key principles, and then it had these sub principles. And then it was also around the same time, the energy literacy framework kind of borrowed that idea and created this a framework as well. And so with that, right around the same time, we were gearing up for the next generation science standards. And so what came out of this was the CleanNet. And so the CleanNet is a website that we can go to that used the climate literacy principles, the energy literacy principles, and NGSS to kind of go through and create this collection, this community of the climates for climate science and climate change. And so There we go. There's three, what we call pillars in clean, affectionately called clean. First off is that we have the collection. I'll talk more about that momentarily. Now we're up, I'm going to suggest we're over 850 pieces of or resources, instructional resources that have all been peer reviewed. And we have some wonderful filter systems I'll talk about in a minute to get to them. We also have pedagogical supports. And so in other words, how are we going to teach about climate literacy? Somebody might be new to it, and how do you do it? We have climate change and climate science in K2. How do you teach those kiddies about that? And we actually have some supports on this website on how to do that. And then finally, it's also a vibrant community of practice where we're going to invite you to join us. So let's talk a little bit about the clean net in general, then we'll zero into those three pillars. So as I mentioned that if we, climate.gov is a great repository for everything about climate science. What you're going to see is that the climate.gov and clean collection, they're kind of married together. So change that you see on one page is actually going to be seen on the other page as well. So they're kind of connected. Coordinated calendar, they coordinate PD, all of that. So there's a very close connection. Excuse me. The clean collection itself, those 850 resources are all community reviewed. As a matter of fact, I'm expecting a batch to come in momentarily for me to review. They're classroom ready with all kinds of great hints on how to use them in the classroom. They're all been reviewed by expert scientists. They've all been curated. And they're all online and they're free resources. So that's a big thing too, is they've got to be free. They align with NGSS as well as those literacy frameworks. And there's a ton of filter options. The one thing to point out here along the lines of being curated is that this is what we call a pointer collection, meaning that these resources live someplace else, but we point to them. Okay, so why use the clean net? Why go to clean for your resources, education resources? Well, if you wanted to find a hurricane lesson plan, and let's hope that you don't go to Teacher Pay Teacher, nor will you go to Pinterest, nor will you go to these other places, but you might do a Google search for a hurricane lesson plan. It's going to bring back an inordinate number of resources. Too many I used to have my rule when I did my searches, I go 5 pages deep and that's it. If I couldn't find what I'm looking for, I need to change my resource. But even that takes a long time. What if we were instead to put hurricane in a search box in the clean collection? We'd only get back 37. And you're going to see with the filters that we have that you can narrow it down pretty darn quickly to the 1 or 2 resources that are going to be a hit for what you need in your classroom the next day. So it's that classroom ready. Encourage you to use it. So this busy diagram that you're seeing here is just showing you and explaining to you the review process. And so anybody can submit a resource. And so it's going to go through an initial vetting by the team at Clean. And then once it's made through the initial vetting, it's going to go through a formal review. And so I'll be getting a collection of them, probably between 10 and 15 to review momentarily. But other people are going to be reviewing them as well. And so if they pass that review, they're going to go to another review and then another review, and they go to review camp. And then one more review. And then if they pass that, my goodness, this is a struggle, isn't it? They pass that, then they can they'll get cataloged, and then they'll be put into the clean collection. And so there's been thousands and thousands of resources that have been submitted, but not too many actually make it to the top and make it to the collection. And so when you open up a resource on the clean collection, this is what the page looks like. You have up at the top, you have the name of the resource. You've got a direct link to the resource, a little bit brief description. So this is where if you're kind of looking for a quick idea of if it's going to work for me or not, read that quick little intro right there. You have all kinds of notes from the reviewers. And so when I do my reviews, I'll be adding some of these things myself into the boxes. And so some of my comments will actually be making the way into the notes from the reviewers. You've got all of the connections by grade level, by topic, by climate literacy. All of these are what we call tags. And so this one resource has been tagged for quite a bit. And then, and the description I've already reviewed for you. You can search by so many different things. So you can search by resource type, by grade band, NGSS, or by specific topics. And notice that you've got all of these filters on the side here, and there's more filters than this, by the way, but I have to mention. And so you can very quickly and very easily narrow down and get to where you want to be. And even in here, it's not in this list, but there are actually some regional resources. You can search by data. Some things have been tagged that's just data only. So it's tons of great ways to search and get to what you're looking for. And so what you're going to see also, so that was with the NGSS, everything has been tagged to NGSS, and you can get to the NGSS connections by the tables at a glance, browse by NGSS, or just search for the entire collection, real specific, and it gets down to almost the element level. And so this is just the NGSS clean at a glance at the elementary, the middle school, and high school. By the way, in the past year or so, we've gotten built in quite a few elementary level resources, which is way cool as well. And so if we were to just click in, so in high school, to kind of keep drilling in, we can click in and narrow down to a specific core idea in that for that topic. You can actually drill down even more. This kind of gives you a description of the NGSS, and these are the resources that are fit with this. These 7 hits will actually fit with this particular element from NGSS. Okay, and you keep refining and refining the results. They've also got another way. So if you were to search by climate and energy solutions, you want high school level resources, just click that. It will take you can even drill down to further an activity analyzing data and tools, that particular SEP. You can drill down to activity and we'll get you to another resource. And so that's a few ways you can narrow down by NGSS alone. And then I'm sorry, one more way they can narrow down by NGSS is that you can narrow down by the disciplinary core ideas over there, but also have that mixed in with the other filters that you have here. Lots of filters, very easy to find what you're looking for in the collection of 850 different resources. We are about 11 minutes before the top of the hour, actually 10 minutes now. So I'm going to suggest that we not do a treasure hunt right now, but I'm going to suggest that you look at the clean net as a rabbit hole yourself and go down the rabbit hole. Have some fun on the clean page for a half an hour. Give yourself a half an hour window just to play around, get lost, and kind of navigate back. You're going to find that there's breadcrumb trails, so you can navigate back pretty quickly and easily, but see what you can find and have some fun with that. But in the meantime, we're going to hold off for the chat box until to the end. But I want to talk a little bit more about the other resources, terrific resources that you're going to find on the CleanNet. So the other piece I mentioned was of the 3 pillars. The other second pillar is pedagogical support and classroom readiness guidance. And this page, you go to this, you're going to find that you have a number of different boxes and all kinds of great resources if you're new to teaching about climate science and climate change. And one of my favorite things in here is this toolbox. This toolbox has some ready-made units in it and a couple ready-made lessons, plus also templates that you can use for units and lessons. I used one of one of the modules that's in here, one of the units that's in here in my classroom. And you're going to find that those sample units are actually just clean resources. And so you can create a unit with just clean resources, a lesson with just the clean resources. And I'll show you that if we have time, if I can talk fast enough through the rest of this, I've got an example of how you can do a 5E lesson with just clean resources if we have time at the end of this. So all kinds of great ways for teaching. So if you're in a district where you have a little bit of pushback on the climate science, there's also some guidance and teaching about that. And et cetera, et cetera. So I encourage you to go there. So this is one of the pages that is, if you look down at the search over here on the left side of the page, this is about teaching about climate and energy, some of the pages that come up, some guidance, and they all follow the energy principles and all kinds of resources. Just keep going and going with resources, including quizzes that you can integrate into your classroom. Okay, So I mentioned a little bit about the toolbox already, but there are some things that you can actually find in there. So you can find curriculum guides, you can find National Academy, National Climate Climate Assessment resources, and that would actually take you to our region, Northeast region. You get some information there. Managing the controversy, there's a whole section on that. STEM flashes, some PD webinars, some virtual teaching, all of these are in the educator toolbox. So I'll encourage you to jump in and take a look at that, and all the great resources for there. Okay, so I've already mentioned all of these. The one I did was the energy grid. I used a piece of that towards the end. I wanted to teach my students about smart grids, how smart grids work. And so was a wonderful little activity at the end of that module or unit that I did with my students, and it was terrific, absolutely terrific. So I encourage you to look at all of those. And there's professional development. They have a spring array and a fall array of webinars. We're in webinar season right now. So if you go to the website, you'll see that we have webinars coming up for the month of March and April, and a couple that are past. They've always posted the recordings. So if you miss one and you want to go back and look at them, go back, feel free to go back in a later time and find them. There's some great ones in there. If you're new to Clean, you might use the earlier ones that talk that are like tutorials. There's one in there that's specifically for elementary teaching and how to teach elementary students about climate science and climate change. So I encourage you to look at those. And the STEM Flash newsletter it's going to highlight a current event, but it's also going to be tying in the rich resources from the Clean collection about that particular resource. Okay. Again, we're kind of I'm looking at the clock, and I want to get to that last pillar, but we'll just kind of keep going. Okay, and the piece here, this last pillar, is about you joining in this network. So it's a vibrant community of practice. They have weekly lunch meetings, and you're actually more than welcome to join their weekly lunch meetings. So that's one way that you can get involved. So that's joining the Clean network. You can join in and get that STEM Flash. I belong to their email list, and so anybody's pointing on that, sending out an announcement, I get on their email list. And so I encourage you to do that. And just take a look at the network. If you see that on the page on the website, click that and just see how you can get involved at a level that you're comfortable with being involved. And so these are other ways, and just keep going. There's ways of being involved. You can suggest a resource that it'll have a page for you to do that. The webinars are all in here. So all of this is ways that you can get involved. Okay, and there is a flash, there is a social media. There are social media places as well for Clean. So you can see down at the bottom left corner for the Clean Lit, Facebook, Cleanette, and you also have Instagram for Clean Work. So encourage you to join all that. Okay, and so at this point, I don't know how many we have in the chat box, but how might you use the Clean? I know we didn't get a chance to do any kind of treasure hunt given the limited amount of time that we have, but how might you use Clean, or maybe any of the resources that were shared today?
Anybody has any questions too or thoughts?
Yeah.
I know there's tons of links that I threw into the chat as Missy was going through it. But yeah, from start to finish, I really encourage you all to kind of take Missy's advice and be thinking about not only resources that talk about climate change, in places far away, but really being able to pull in the very local data and making it real and making it understandable to students that this isn't a far off problem. This is a problem happening in our own backyards and happening right now. All the more reason for taking action and kind of thinking about moving ahead. And then as you as the educator want to bring it into your classroom, tons of interdisciplinary resources around not only understanding the phenomena, but taking action on it. at a wide variety of levels. So many great resources out there that Missy, I feel like this was like a potpourri of like just a
Yeah.
buffet of awesome climate change ed resources.
Yeah, so it's that rabbit hole thing. There's
Yeah.
just so many good things out there, but I just caution that make sure that the resources that you're using within your classroom have all been vetted. Make sure that the science is accurate, and have some fun with that, and
Right.
encourage your students to jump in and take that data dive,
Yeah.
and then from that, once they come out of that data dive, think about those solutions. We definitely need them in the future.
Yeah, accurate data, up to date data, that's so critical. When we send students to these websites that are linked in the curriculum that's God knows how many years old, and we're
Mhm.
showing students data from the 90s, and so much, so much has changed. We've learned so much more
Yeah.
in just a very short amount of time. So it's very important that yeah, these resources have been vetted, and so Missy's shared a wide array of them. So awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And good luck with the competition, and have fun with it.
Thanks so much, Missy. So I have a few just last reminders about upcoming sessions that I'll pull up real quick. And then if anybody else is still thinking about questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. Let me get my slides up there. So we do still have, I know we're getting kind of towards the end of our month of February of student sessions. We still do have a couple of oh, I don't realize I didn't have my video on. Sorry, folks. I'm still here. It's just, a Thursday afternoon. But anyway, we still have a few more sessions coming up for students. And actually, these final two sessions around food waste and composting were actually some of the most widely requested topics for students to think about taking very localized action on climate change. And we received a number of student action, climate action projects last year about food waste and composting. And so we, this was like by request, right? So students wanted to learn more about how climate change is impacted by food waste and composting and how that is helpful. So we have some upcoming sessions that you can still watch live, or lots of recordings available on our bit.ly website, which I'll drop in the chat again, which takes you to the Sustainable Jersey for Schools website. Just so much more information. And then after today, we do have one more professional development coming up, just sneaking in on February 2nd. Not quite the month of February, but it's okay. February is too short. We can't, it's too much fun to fit it all into 1 month. But we'll have hosted by Allison Walsh from New Jersey Audubon. We'll be talking about protecting New Jersey's habitats through student action and linking that to climate change. And then again, I've said it a couple times, I'll drop the link in the chat again, but there's lots of great resources for teachers and students alike, as well as some of the more, small grains kind of stuff, thinking about the actual contest rules, but then also big picture things as well, thinking about that climate change or climate challenge rather brochure, which would be great if you need a little bit of like promotional material to share with a fellow colleague in your school to get them involved, or to make sure to get your principal on board with your participation in the challenge. Lots of great resources there. And teachers, if you're not already registered, your registering does not commit you to submit a student project, but it does help you to kind of get on our email list, so that if news comes out or things change or updates or new resources, we can send it your way. And that registration link is at our bit.ly. And then just our socials and other ways to connect with us, our email address. I know we dropped our emails into the chat a little bit earlier, but that's where we'll leave it for today. I see, Krista, a question about all of these sessions, both the teacher PD sessions and the student sessions, are all recorded and will be placed at the Sustainable Jersey website, and that can be all accessed through the bit.ly link. Yep. And a PDP cert, I will have to talk to Renee about that, but I think we can at least document that you were here. So certainly send an email to that NJ Student Climate Challenge at sustainablejersey.com, and we'll be able to help you out with that. Any other questions or anything we can do with tonight? Okay, yes, Renee confirms we can send a certificate. Thanks, Renee. All right, well, I think we're just about good. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but if there's any other questions, please feel free to, we are in Zoom meeting. You can unmute and hop on. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great evening. Bye, thanks, have a great night.